Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone across the globe joining us today. This is Bridget from Acquia. Today's webinar is Improving the User Journey with UX Research and Personalization with Suzanne Dergacheva from Evolving Web and Teresa Anderson from Acquia. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any audio issues, please send them in the Q&A tab and I will assist you. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A tab as well, and they will answer them at the end of the presentation. Slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Teresa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Anderson. I'm a digital experience strategist here at Acquia, and I'm excited to present today on this webinar on this topic.
And my name's Suzanne Dergacheva. I'm a co-founder of Evolving Web. We're an open source web agency based in Montreal. We've been specializing in Drupal for about 12 years, and we work with lots of clients in the higher ed space, as well as lots of nonprofits and government organizations. And in addition to doing a lot of user-centric design and development work, we run a training program. So we train plenty of people who are new to Drupal, things from introductory courses for content editors and marketers, and also more advanced developer courses.
And for those of you that aren't familiar with Acquia, we're the open source digital experience company. Our roots come from Drupal, so we're seated in Drupal as well. We've been in business for about 11 years and have just over 1,000 employees now. We help companies across all industries to create the digital experience that their customers are truly demanding. We bring digital experiences to life for the world's most ambitious brands. Currently, our products are split into two different categories, or as illustrated here, clouds. Our Drupal cloud helps customers build, design, and run sites. We've expanded this cloud to include Cohesion, which is our latest acquisition last year. It's a low-code solution for site builders. And then we also have our marketing cloud, which helps customers understand, personalize, and engage with their customers across all channels. We've had quite a few additions to this cloud in the past year as well, with adding Mautic and Maestro, which are our marketing automation products and tools, as well as Agile One, which is our brand new CDP. So we're here, personalization is not new. It's been around for a while, yet marketers still seem to struggle with personalization and really being successful with it. The truth is, personalization is only effective if you can make real connections with your customers. And in order to do that, you still have to do the hard work of defining user journeys. The best tools to do those are with user experience research and content strategy. The tools we'll discuss today can be applied across any industry, but for the purposes of the webinar today, we're going to focus on the higher education industry. So just to go through some quick stats, why is personalization important? When used properly, marketers have seen a 760% increase in revenue from segmented campaigns. In higher education right now, the enrollment has dropped for the 8th consecutive year. So personalization could be a very helpful tool to leverage in order to increase that enrollment conversion. One of the reasons enrollment has dropped is because most universities have failed to meet basic usability standards as desired by their prospect or current students. And your website is the most important tool for conversion, since it's the #1 research tool that prospect students are using. So being able to leverage personalization along with your website to really give the students the targeted personalized content they're looking for could really help those conversion rates. And on this next slide, we just are showing the lowest conversion rate on average across all industries, and higher education really is that lowest conversion rate. It's right now that's experiencing a conversion issue where you're getting a lot more people that are applying to your schools. But the conversion from people that are applied and accepted to actually enrolling has continued to decrease. There's just so many different options for students right now that they're applying to a lot more schools, but really when they actually do decide what school to go to, they're very specific with what they choose and why they choose that school. So it becomes more important to really less on getting them to actually apply, but more importantly, once they have been accepted into the school, to actually get them to enroll. And it goes beyond just sending an acceptance letter to them. So really being able to personalize and make students feel welcome, like this, your program is the program for them, and really helping to increase that conversion rate from people that are accepted to actually enrolling in your programs. So Suzanne's going to walk you through some tools you can use to help increase conversion.
So when starting on any project, whether it's a brand new website or kind of a revamp of your content strategy or user experience, I always start out kind of thinking about this overlap. So you have your business goals or your organizational goals, what you're trying to achieve, and then you have all the things that your users want, all the features that they want to see, all the content that they're looking for. And one of the challenging parts of user experience design is that this varies so much from user to user. So what users want isn't just one thing. It changes depending on where they're coming from, what stage they're at in the process. It changes based on geographically where they are. There's just so many factors. And so that's why personalization has become so popular as a concept and as a goal, because with personalization, we can really customize what we show users depending on who they are. The real challenge here is that you need to strike this balance between consistency and personalization. And sometimes it can be kind of overwhelming if you just jump into personalization for the first time and don't quite know where to start. So I suggest starting with more of a framework and really building it from the ground up. So rather than starting with personalization, starting off more with your user experience and content strategy and getting those in place, and then implementing personalization on top as kind of this final level. So I'm just going to walk you through the process that we follow on most of our projects. And so hopefully this will be helpful in giving you more of a framework to think about how to start using personalization. So let's start with a foundation. So this is a step that I think a lot of people skip because they assume that they understand the how, the what, the why behind your organization, behind your university, your college. You kind of assume that you already know this, but just taking the time to step back and thinking about this and determining business goals before launching in is really valuable. I think a lot of organizations kind of look elsewhere. You're looking at what all your competitors are doing, which is really valuable because that's what students are doing, right? Students are going out and comparing all these different schools, and they're taking the best experiences that they have. And if you're not living up to that, they kind of see that as a like that's their minimum expectation for the experience that they want. And the problem is, if every university website, if you just copy every other university website, it's just going to look the same, and it's not necessarily going to ring true. So to really create that experience and to create a strong content strategy, you need to start with the values and differentiators that set your organization apart. So I'll just walk through a couple use cases. We've recently been working on a project for the Woodrow Wilson School, and what we found out when we sat down with them, and we actually sat down with their stakeholders and some representative users and their project team, and we talked to them about the values of their organization, what they do, how they do it, and why. And that why question is really the one that gets to the heart of it. And what we figured out that was surprising is that they don't just focus on educating their students and preparing graduates for the world. They actually also have a goal of disseminating their research and translating that research for a broader audience. And they do that so that they can influence media and influence policymakers. And so that was a broader goal that we found. And having a kind of unique goal like that, it doesn't just ring true for the audiences that it specifically relates to. Like, it's not just valuable to have that goal for media and policymakers, but having a unique differentiator is really helpful for students as well. They're really gonna relate to that. Another project we recently took on was doing some work with the McGill DESAUTELS school. This is McGill's business school. And they were introducing some new master's programs into their curriculum. And they wanted to know how to position these for students, how to kind of present them in a way that shows students more what the offerings are, and how to get more students to sign up basically to these new programs. And so we talked a bit to the school about what their offerings were, but we also talked to students. So right away we went out and interviewed some students. And from that we were able to tell what the key selection criteria were for those students and what values and differentiators they saw at McGill. So sometimes, you know, as a school, you know, you talk to the same people, you get the same answers to questions. Sometimes you do need to go and talk to students and see what they see as the value, because they're also part of the community that makes up your organization. So starting with those business goals is key. And then that can kind of act as a filter, that what, how, why exercise that we do. We always leave that around during our whole process, just to make sure that we're constantly reminded of what we're striving for. So the user experience piece is sort of the next layer on top of this. And this is where we go more for the user perspective. And we want to think about, when you're starting to build a UX strategy, what elements influence UX. So UX covers quite a bit of ground. It's the information architecture of your site, it's the navigation, the layout, the proximity of elements to each other, the content. There's so many things that go together into a really effective user experience. And so to start off, when you're planning out what that experience should be, typically we start off with building personas. So you've probably heard of personas before, you've probably used them in your own work. I find that to really make personas effective, they need to include details about different users' motivations and goals. So personas aren't just about different audiences, but they're actually about specific goals that a user has. And so for example, you might have students in general, but you're going to have students who are at different phases in their decision-making process. Like Teresa mentioned, you know, before they apply, after they apply, these are both important personas, important kind of user journeys that we need to design for. So you want to be kind of defining what personas are most valuable. And prioritize those. So one of the hardest questions that we ask during this whole user experience process is sitting down and saying, well, here's all our personas, now pick the most important ones. And that's actually a hard question to ask. You know, sometimes you ask that question and you get, you know, no one wants to be the first one to answer, but by prioritizing, you can really help build a more cohesive content strategy. So after you define the personas, sometimes you need to gather a little bit more information, and you can do that through surveys and interviews, figuring out, again, what motivates these actual users, getting actual user stories from users, like what was their experience applying to the school. That can be really valuable when you're doing the rest of the build. And then we go through a typical process of element gathering, which means just taking all of your content, all of the potential content you might have, like if competitors are, using some content that you don't have, you might consider adding it. All of the features that you might need on your website, we take all of those and put them together, and we do a sorting. So you probably have seen this type of activity before, where you're taking all these different content components and kind of mapping them out based on what tasks go together, and really thinking about it through the lens of your personas. And I find what's most valuable here is really that persona perspective. And one little trick when you're doing these types of user experience exercises is to color code the different content elements that you have. So I like using sticky notes because they're fun and everyone gets really into it. If you use different colored sticky notes for each type of user, each persona, then you can actually see when you build out your whole content map what personas are interested in which sections of your site. So if you see that there's many different colors interested in one area, that might be one area where you might want to do some personalization because you're going to have so many types of users arriving in the same place. So sticky notes are great, but we take the sitemap and make a digital version. And these days we really like to use a tool called Flow Map. So if you're in this process right now and you're looking for a tool, that's one I would recommend. The nice thing about it is that it's not just a sitemap, like a set of elements in a map like this. You can actually go into different pages and annotate them. And this means that even at this step, you can start to write the purpose of the page and start to think about the content that needs to be there and who it's for. And you can indicate if there's a specific purpose that needs to be highlighted, like for a specific persona that's maybe different than other pages on the site. So even now you can start to think about this as being like the starting of a content brief and the starting of really of the content strategy exercise. So on top of the user experience work and thinking about the user journeys, we build a content strategy. And the content strategy piece is more about the messaging and the content to support users in their decisions. So when a user actually arrives on a page, what's going to convince them to go to the next step? You know, what supporting content do they need? What call to action is going to speak to them? So, you know, you wouldn't necessarily put a link to attend an alumni event on a page about how to apply. So just because something's an event and you want to have a list of upcoming events, you want to make sure that that content is as relevant as possible. So when we think about how users assess their experiences, there's all kinds of things that go into that. You know, you want to build at a baseline a really robust experience. And so things like timing, predictability, simplicity, just a user being able to find the information, success versus failure. These are all things that users are going to influence a user's experience. I think the parts that are really related to content strategy are the tone of voice and the empathy. So what kind of tone do you strike in your content? And then does a user feel like they can relate to the experience that they're having? Do they feel a connection or an allegiance to your organization? And the challenge with tone of voice and empathy is that different tones of voice are going to relate to different people. You want to build a consistent tone of voice, but you also want to be able to adapt it depending on who you're speaking to. So before you start to personalize, when you're building your content strategy, there's different approaches you might take to just have a core content strategy that works. So one thing that you can do is that you can try and have a consistent, inclusive language where you're writing for everyone. So this is an approach that we see on a lot of sites where your audience is quite general. So if you're thinking of like a hospital website or a government website or a site that really has a very broad public, Having inclusive language where anyone can read any page and get the information they need, that's usually the right approach. Other sites, I see a strategy of focusing on the most important audience and writing for them. So you might decide, okay, this is a future students website that we're building. The most important audience is obviously potential students. I'm just going to write for them. And so you might have that as your core strategy of just speaking to that one audience and not worrying about secondary audiences because that single audience is just overwhelmingly important. And then a third strategy might be to focus on different audience on a page-by-page basis. So you might say, well, this is the alumni section. Here we can speak to alumni. Here's another section for future students. This is the section for current students. And here's the section for the media and the public. And we'll just write for all those audiences separately and do that on a page-by-page basis. And you still need to build consistency into that. Obviously, you don't want to be completely changing tone of voice, but you can kind of speak more to one audience or another. And this page-by-page content strategy, usually it's a good idea to, if you're going to go with this approach, to actually have a bit of a template to define a content strategy for each page. So at a minimum, you might want to use this template and kind of fill in these answers for each page so that you just know what you're trying to convey. And having a template is useful, especially if you have many content editors, because you want to get everyone on the same page. If it's one person kind of setting up these pages and then someone else updating them, or if you have different content owners throughout the same website. So on top of that core content strategy, you will start to see areas where personalization can come into play. So personalization means that you're adjusting the content that you have for your key audiences. And key audiences is the tricky part there, and adjusting what content, that's also tricky. So we're going to get into the details of that. With personalization, you can focus on particular audiences or personas, more specific segments. And so one of the challenges is that we start to create a lot of work for ourselves. And if you can think about, we build a lot of multilingual websites. You can think about the analogy there where if you decide, oh, I need to appeal to more audiences, so I'm just going to translate my website into 10 languages. So immediately you're going to have 10 times as much content writing to do. So with personalization, we don't want to have that same challenge of having to translate everything we do for every single persona, every single audience. We really want to do this in a strategic way because you want to make what you set up sustainable. So the first question that I would try and start to ask is who to target. So if you want to go back to your personas and what their high-level goals are, that's going to start to give you some clues about what your target segments should be. So when we just look at higher education in general and what decision factors are contributing when students are making the decision of where to apply, assuming that students applying to a school is a really important user journey, we have many different decision-making factors. So affordability is a key one. Some students are looking for a particular program. They're looking for the quality, kind of the prestige of an organization. They're looking for their career. So you're going to have actually different students prioritizing these decision-making factors differently. But these ones are all kind of top of the list when you ask students. So based on some of those factors, we can start to think about potential segments. So segments based on affordability, we might have people who are specifically looking for a scholarship, or we might look at students who are applying maybe from in-state or out of state. Geographically, different students are going to have different requirements to attend a school, and they're going to have a different experience depending on if they're an international student or if they're more local or national. different levels for sure make a huge difference in what students are looking for, what their decision-making factors are. So we might be trying to target more undergraduate, graduates, or continuing studies students. Some students are very influenced by career, especially I think looking at that business school example I had earlier. At certain schools where there's more of a relation between the career path and the curriculum, you're going to have some students who are really influenced by that. That's their key decision-making factor, is what they're going to get out of it in terms of their career. And mature students, especially if they're coming in with industry experience, they're going to be looking at how this helps them get to the next step. Motivations overall, we see some patterns here. So some students, they're looking at the academic track. Maybe they're interested after their undergraduate to go on to do a graduate degree. So they'll probably be looking for specific programs. You have career seekers who are more influenced by those career pathways, and then maybe some social butterflies who are more interested in the student life and influenced by that factor when they're comparing schools. So all kinds of different segments to consider. So you might make a list of the top segments that you think are most important. And in doing this, I would ask a whole bunch of questions. So before assuming that you have these 20 or 30 segments that you have to go after, you want to ask some questions to really make sure that you're getting the most out of the work that you're doing. You're actually aiming to have the least amount of personalization to make the most amount of impact, because you don't want to be doing extra work with no payoff. And so that's why these questions are important. So you want to start by asking for the different segments what audience a segment belongs to, whether those segments, whether you're actually targeting the student, or are you targeting an influencer? You want to also be asking, this really influences the eventual tone of voice, but are you targeting insiders or outsiders? You can ask about the persona. So audience is more about the person in terms of their demographics. Persona is more about the step they're at in their journey, what's motivating them, their current goals. You want to ask what key actions you want them to take. So that's a really important question. And then how important is that action to your business goals? So if you're trying to influence alumni and you're trying to get them to donate, that could be a really important business goal for the site that you're building. But for another action, like trying to engage with current students, that could actually be much less valuable to you. So it's important to measure that so that you know what you're trying to get out of this. Measuring the level of engagement of the segment, what stage someone's at in their investigation. So if somebody, again, is applying to a school, what information do they currently need to get to the next step? And are they already engaged? So is somebody they've already attended a webinar, they've already come to an event, or are they just doing that initial research? So that's going to impact the value of the segment and also what information you need to feed. What defines the segment? So this is maybe more of a technical question, like how do you actually pinpoint what the segment is? So how do we tell that a user is interested in a scholarship? What would give us that signal? And then do you have the data to create that segment? So data more around like, do we have the data just from their browsing behavior? Do we have the data because they're logged into the site? Or do we have the data just because we have it through the browser, say like where the user is located? That would be a really simple piece of demographic data that we could get. So sometimes you might have a great segment and not really have a way to do the segmentation. And you can start to add things in your site, like different trackers to gather that data. So this, just because this question, maybe you don't have the data right now, but maybe you could add the data. So that could lead into your planning of how you're going to implement the personalization. So one just key thing to remember with segments is that segments kind of go beyond personas. Going back to the beginning, audiences are just kind of who you're targeting, who you want to speak to. Personas go a step further, where we're actually talking about what motivates people, what their goals are. Maybe at different steps, they're going to have a different persona. Like a future student becomes a current student. And then beyond personas, you have way more options with segmentation, because with segmentation, you can really target specific behaviors of students and other audiences. So sort of the sky's the limit when you start working with personalization. So I'll just talk a little bit about what to personalize, because this is also something that can be a challenge. So once you have those segments defined, kind of knowing what on your website would be valuable to personalize is the next step. There's some aspects of your website that you might want to personalize. There's also other aspects that are kind of go beyond the website. So on your website, you might be thinking just about the messaging that a user gets, their call to actions that they see, what content you prioritize, what supporting content you show them. Some content that's maybe integrated into the site, like maps or quizzes, these are things that could also be personalized. We see now more and more like potential students really want to interact with people before they apply to a school or before they accept an offer. And so they might want to chat with faculty or students online. So you might provide some tool for that. And you also want to make sure that other experiences that you're integrating with, like social, those can also be personalized. So there's a huge opportunity there. And email is also listed. Email is a great place to implement personalization. So this personalization strategy can go way beyond your website. I'm going to focus on some of the website components today. So tone of voice and messaging. So the first message somebody sees, you want the personality of a university to be consistent, but the tone might change. So if we think back to those segments, ready to join our community, this is something that you might personalize if somebody's already in your community, or maybe ready to take that next step of accepting an application. So this call to action seems to be really external facing for potential students, but this could be something that is customized. Supporting text. So here in this application section, we see this next steps kind of call out, and it's pretty generic. It's just like, take the next step. Everything's here that you need. This is a place where we could personalize. So if we know that we're talking to international students, we could do a special call out to them, and we could customize the image to show more students that you'd relate to. If we know that a student is going to need to apply for a scholarship and that's what's motivating them, we could do a call out for that and mention the scholarship opportunities. We can also insert extra content for target segments. So if you have a segment that for example, that you have some local students that you want to target, you could use some space like this to advertise an open house that's coming up. Whereas an international student, it might be more effective to show them an invitation for a webinar that they would be more likely to attend. So that's one place that personalization could definitely be useful. Calls to action that lead students to take the next step are also valuable. This is another snippet of the McGill DESAUTELS website. They have a lot of great information about their research and all the work that they do, and adding in calls to action, targeting users who have already expressed interest in a specific program, that could be really valuable to help them, prompt them to take that next step as they're doing further investigation about the school. So that's an opportunity. There's a lot of great content. You want to make those user journeys and click paths very obvious. And here's another similar example. We're highlighting a specific program and just prompting students to take that next step and apply. Could be really valuable, especially if you already know the program that they're most interested in. Supporting content is shown to be really valuable in convincing users to take the next step. So it's not enough to just have a lot of marketing content. You actually want to have kind of evidence and proof, like here's our school, here's what's really going on. And I think one of the most effective ways to do that is through profiles of students, faculty, alumni. And when looking through a lot of higher ed sites, this is the first thing that really catches my eye of like, okay, this is how I'm going to see what this school is all about. And I know that from talking to a lot of potential students who are doing this application process, they're looking to see if they're a good fit. So they're actually, maybe they're super qualified, but they actually want to know, are there people like me who would go to this school? Like maybe I'm not a typical candidate. Is there someone else who's gone through a similar journey? And so they're really looking to see their own story on the website. And so if we can do some work to customize the profiles that we're pulling out here to show other students, other, or could be alumni as well, could be faculty, but people who have had a similar experience, that's really going to help convince. This is another example from a scholarship application website. And testimonials, kind of similar concept. We can do the same thing here and really do a lot of personalization at this level. Content prioritization is another thing that you might not think of, similar to supporting content, but content prioritization is just more around the way we order content. So on this website, there's a slider, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you use, but it's there. And the first thing in the slider is this promo for an aviation management program, which is a very specific piece of content. So if you have any content like this where you're prioritizing, here's another example where just a set of useful links are highlighted on the homepage of this website, and having these prioritized based on the user's interests and their current journey that they're undergoing, what's going to help them get to that next step, that's going to be valuable. So if you have a way to prioritize your content, that's going to be super helpful. And with all of these examples of content prioritization, when you're building a Drupal website, if you know in advance what you want to personalize and you can express that, you have a list of things, here's the top 5, and you can tell that to the team who will be building out the website, that's super valuable for them to know in advance. So knowing that they're going to have to swap that content in and out, it might actually influence how they build it. It might influence how they set up tracking, and it'll just be very helpful to plan that out. If you've already built out a site, it's also possible to add in personalization later, absolutely. But just having this list of content that could be personalized for the team who will be building it is going to be very helpful. So once you start to go through the process of actually building the personalization, you're going to think about how it fits into the whole experience of the site. So you don't want to just take this totally in isolation. It's really helpful to do kind of walkthroughs to think about how a student's going to interact with the components that you're personalizing. And then going ahead and just doing some very simple testing could be very valuable. So even before you've implemented the personalization, just doing a walkthrough doesn't even have to be like a full real user test, but just have someone else take a look and imagine that they're at a certain step in their process. How are they using the site? What content are they looking at? Do the click paths make sense? That's very valuable. So looking at the entire process, not just the isolated content components, that's going to be helpful. Okay, and then just to wrap up this section, what not to personalize. So don't personalize navigation. You don't want to throw users off if their experience becomes inconsistent because you're starting to throw around really key links to things that they need to be able to find. They're going to get frustrated because things aren't in quote unquote the right place. You also don't want to personalize things like facts and figures. Like if you're trying to create a personalized experience for international students, don't just throw in another timeline for them and assume that you've gotten it right. So personalization doesn't always work perfectly. So you want to make sure that key information is not personalized. And your number one goal is not to disorient or confuse users. You want to enhance the experience. So just keep that in mind. Same thing here for the navigation. Don't change this on a per segment basis. And I'm just going to pass it back to Teresa, who's going to talk a little bit more about how to do personalization.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. So we've learned a lot about, building up to personalization and what to personalize and what not to personalize. I'm just going to show you a quick few snapshots on how to personalize and how to think about personalization. So, and this is specific to how we personalize within Acquia Lift, but the general idea should be the same across any personalization tools. So really, when you're trying to personalize, the first step is really to identify your audience. In Acquia Lift, we define those as segments, but it's really how are you going to group your audience based on common goals, interests, or behaviors. And this is where you can leverage your personas that you've created or the journeys to understand creating segments around specific types of personas or where people are within their journey to be able to serve them up relevant content. Then once you have your segment, you can start collecting data around those segments, which is really valuable. So you can start understanding how that group of people are interacting with your website and what their browsing behaviors are. And this data will then help be able to inform your personalizations. So leveraging that browsing behavior and data along with your content strategy and the content that you have on your site, you can really leverage those two to create the rules, which is really step 2. And those rules are really, think about it as if a visitor does this, then show them that. So if a visitor is interested in this type of program, show them content around that program or articles or people they might be able to reach out to and talk to along that are specific to that program. So the rules are really if this, then that. And then lastly, once you have your segments defined and your rules defined, you have to determine where you want to put those personalizations. And Suzanne walked us through a lot of great examples on where you can personalize on your website. So it's just identifying for that audience and that rule, where does it make the most sense to put this personalized message? So it's really focusing on that. So really in the simplest terms, when you really think about this, step 1 is defining the who you should personalize to. Step 2 is defining the what. So that's really using the data to figure out what content you want to show to them. And then step 3 is the where. Where do you really want to put it? So it's the who, what, and where for personalization. So then when you think about how to personalize and how to group your segments, there's lots of ways you can do it. At Acquia, we like to take a crawl, walk, run approach to it. So crawl is really using some simple personalizations based on situational information or demographics. So when you do that, it's really looking at, like, what do you know about these people, these visitors? Is it that you know that they're international? Is it that you know that they live within your state? Marketing campaigns is another great way to do this. You're probably already sending out marketing campaign emails or paid media, social media, things like that. If you're targeting them to a specific audience or group, you can carry that code, that UTM code, over through to Lift and create segments based on that. So if you happen to be running an international campaign, that you have someone that clicks through on that campaign and goes to the website, now you can track them and put them within that campaign for international UTM code. So that's another great way. And those are all pretty simple to do. They're ones that you can do as soon as you start personalizing. You don't need to collect a lot of data in order to begin doing these personalizations. The next step we move to is really around that walk phase, which gets a little bit more into the behavioral aspects. So this, you need to be able to collect a little bit more data in terms of your visitors and how they're navigating through your website. But you can start personalizing based on pages that they've viewed, or events that they've clicked on or attended, or call to actions that they've been interested in. So it's really taking a look at how are these groups of people navigating through your site, and are there common threads and behaviors in the way that they're navigating your site or the pages that they're viewing and things that they're interested in. And once you can find those, you can really start personalizing and serving up the relevant content that you really think that they're looking for. And then the last one is that walk phase. And so that's once you really are more advanced with personalization. You can start integrating your CRM along with your personalization tool to really give you that full 360-degree view of your customers. And then that really allows you to do multi-step personalization. So it's not just if this, then that, but it might be a whole string of like 4 or 5 different steps that you start showing to each individual or to each segmented group, so that you're really guiding them through step by step their entire user journey. So here we're just showing a quick little snapshot of how you can use those segments, or how you would create those segments. So this first example on the left-hand side is if you were to create a segment for visitors coming to your site from New York. This might be relevant if you are a university in New York and you want to know that they are residents that are in state, and then therefore you might be showing them different content than if you knew that they were someone from California. You might offer up more of those group tour dates because you know that they can actually come on site given that they are in state, versus someone that might be coming from California and might not be able to fly out to take a look at the school. And then the second example on the right-hand side is an example of a UTM campaign. So for this specific one, there was an external campaign that was created specifically around recruit. And so in that UTM code that comes over with the visitor, if a visitor sees this external campaign, it's a marketing campaign, they click on it, we'll just say it's a banner ad. They click on this recruit banner ad and they get driven to the website. Within that, there's a code, the UTM code carries over with them saying that they came from this recruit banner ad, and therefore you can put them into the segment based on whatever that recruit banner ad was specifically targeting. So these are just 2 examples on how you would set up segments within Lift. There are lots and lots of possibilities on how you could create segments in Lift. Lots of options for segments as well. So now let's just go into a few results that we've seen with higher education specifically. This first one is Bryant University. Like many universities, they were experiencing a conversion issue. The number of applicants continued to increase by 10%, which was great, but the percentage of people that actually enrolled, or students that enrolled, continued to fall. So they really had to increase their enrollment rate so that they not just were accepting more people, but actually were getting more students to actually enroll. And they really wanted to focus particularly on boosting the percentage of female as well as international students. So what they did is they created a unique microsite or website specifically for the undergraduate admissions. And so if you were part of this undergraduate admissions, this microsite or website allowed them to narrow down the content that they were sharing so that it was a lot more specific and specialized to the audience. It wasn't showing everybody for all degrees, whether it be graduate or undergraduate. It was a lot more targeted and focused of a site in general. And then if we talk about their solutions, with that, you can go to the next slide. With that site, when they were designing and developing it, they kept personalization in mind. They knew that they wanted to personalize on this specific site. And so they had that in mind when they were designing and developing the site. They also knew that they wanted to reach customers or prospect students in a very specific, unique way. And so they wanted them to be able to connect with other students that were similar, that had been in a similar program, or that had similar goals and interests to them. And so they were able to create these students' profiles that allowed them to connect with other students that are currently at the school, again, based on those common goals and interests. They also were able to personalize the Meet Your Counselor. And so everyone had, they had a handful of counselors, but they were able to personalize that as well for each student so that you knew you were being served up your counselor's information. And it really made the students feel like it was a very unique and personalized experience to them. It was all about them. And what that did is it increased the percentage of international students that interacted with the campaign. It also increased their overall conversion rate by 5%. So that's just one example from Bryant University. Two other small examples here. This first one, they were able to quadruple their acceptance rates by personalizing the admissions offer process. So I mentioned earlier, it's not enough just to send an offer letter and hope that they actually enroll in the school. But Charles Sturt University, they actually directed applicants to custom landing pages, personalized with their name, an image, and information on the program they actually applied to. So they created these mini microsites that were very personalized and specific to each student that was accepted into the program in order to actually help them enroll, make them feel very warm and welcomed by the college itself or the university. And Lancaster University, they actually did something very unique. They worked with Alexa to act as a digital friend to students that answered questions and provided feedback and advice. Websites are the #1 research tool for prospect students when they're looking to engage, but we also have to consider new mediums that are coming out, and Alexa and Google and all of those are very new mediums, but they are very real. Students are just asking questions to them rather than searching on Google for them. So it's another new medium you have to really consider as well. And so Lancaster did that and really was able to make some good progress as being kind of that digital friend and providing answers to the students' questions. So Suzanne, I'll send it back over to you, just a final wrap up before we go into Q&A.
Thanks, Teresa. So as you can see, personalization can be a really powerful tool. But going back to the beginning of the presentation, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It has to be founded on a whole user experience and content strategy practice. And it's those processes that you can easily start doing in your organization if you haven't already, that are going to really help you pinpoint what personalization will be most valuable and will help you do all the planning that is going to go into the success stories that Teresa was just describing. So I'm just going to pass it off to Bridget for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Teresa and Suzanne. We are going to go over a couple questions. Don't have a ton of time, but the first question is, what do you suggest for organizations that don't have a lot of resources to do content strategy or personalization? And this can be for either one of you.
One thing that I would really suggest if you're just starting out and you haven't done anything like this before, maybe that you don't have anyone dedicated on your team who's called a content strategist, what you want to do is you want to rely on the knowledge that you already have. You probably already know a lot about your students, and just taking the time in your own team to sit down and map out what you know, and how that lines up against what you're currently doing. It's going to give you a really good starting point. So you don't have to do the whole full surveys and interviews, and you don't have to use every tool. You can use content strategy and user experience techniques kind of more selectively and have really great success.
And I would just say, when it comes to personalization, if you are still interested in personalizing but don't have a lot of resources, leverage existing content. Websites in general have a wealth of information on them, and we rely on our visitors to sift through that information and find what's relevant to them. Start by using existing content that you already have and serve up more relevant content faster, so that it's not on the visitor to try and search and find what they're looking for.
Awesome, that's great. All right, we have one more question. For a university with many websites and site owners, how do you go about getting everyone on board with a consistent content strategy?
So one technique that I would suggest there, I know this is used by some larger schools that maybe have hundreds or even 1,000 websites. There's a lot of different site owners. And so just providing them with some kind of consistent resources. So if you want to do something simple like sending out a newsletter every month, or you want to set up some sessions to help train them, you can start to onboard them on a more consistent content strategy as part of that. So just having a really simple write-up of what the tone of voice should be, that can be really valuable for people who have lots of other things on their plate, and adding content to the website is just one in a long list. So you want to keep it simple and just have consistent resources that you can share across campus.
Okay, great. All right, thank you all again for attending our webinar today. And thank you, Suzanne and Teresa. As I said previously, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. And if you have any additional questions, please send them to marketing@theacquiateam.com.